Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for being here today. If you're new, don't forget to like, subscribe and share this video so we can continue building a space where we look beyond headlines and really examine what is happening underneath the surface. Because today's story is not just about a number, it's not just about funding, and it's definitely not just about headlines. It's about consistency. It's about credibility. And it's about what real sustained impact actually looks like when you strip away the noise. So let's start with the facts. Archewell Foundation, through its philanthropic arm, Archewell Philanthropies, has announced continued support for the Responsible Technology Youth Power Fund. This is not the first time. This is not a new initiative. This is the third cohort. And with this latest cohort, 24 youth-led and intergenerational organisations are receiving funding. Collectively, that funding amounts to $1.9 million. Now, pause there for a second, because in today's media environment, numbers are often thrown around quickly, without context, without weight. But $1.9 million directed specifically toward youth-led organisations working on some of the most urgent issues of our time. That is not a small thing. That is not symbolic. That is structural. And what makes this even more significant is where that money is going. It is being directed toward organisations working on artificial intelligence accountability and ethics, youth mental health, digital safety and privacy, civic engagement, climate innovation. These are not abstract topics. These are not distant concerns. These are the issues shaping the future right now. And more importantly, they are issues that disproportionately affect young people. Now, here is where the story becomes even more interesting. Because while this funding was being distributed, something else was happening on the other side of the world. During their time in Australia, Prince Harry and Meghan Sussex were sitting in a room at Swinburne University. They were not at a gala. They were not at a red carpet event. They were in a classroom. And they were speaking with young people from Batyr, a youth mental health organisation working with Australians in rural and remote communities that are often underserved and overlooked, especially when it comes to mental health support. And in that room, something important happened. Not something performative, not something scripted, something real. Meghan Sussex spoke openly about her own experience. She shared that she has been bullied online every single day for 10 years. Think about that. Every day. For a decade. That is not a passing comment. That is a lived reality. And she didn't present it as something that will magically disappear. She said something much more grounded. She said the system, the billion-dollar industry built on outrage, clicks and cruelty, is not going to change overnight. And because of that, people have to be stronger than it. Now, that statement might sound simple on the surface, but it carries weight, because it acknowledges reality without pretending it's something else. It doesn't offer false comfort. It doesn't pretend that systems change quickly. It tells the truth. At the same time, Prince Harry made another key point. He spoke about Australia being one of the first countries to introduce restrictions on social media use for younger audiences. And he described that move as epic, not casually, but from the standpoint of responsibility and leadership. And then he said something even more pointed. He questioned how technology companies can claim they are unable to protect children, while at the same time demonstrating extraordinary precision in targeting them. In other words, if these platforms have the ability to reach children so effectively, then they also have the capacity to protect them. That is not just commentary. That is accountability. Now, here is where everything connects. While those conversations were happening in that classroom at Swinburne University, while those ideas were being discussed, while those realities were being acknowledged, Archewell Philanthropies was actively funding 24 organisations working on those exact same issues. Digital safety, youth mental health, AI accountability, civic engagement, climate innovation. This is not coincidence. This is alignment. And that alignment is what defines real impact. Because it is one thing to talk about problems, it is another thing to fund solutions. And when those two things happen at the same time, within the same framework, across multiple years, that is when you start to see something different. That is when you start to see commitment. Real commitment. Not a one-off appearance. Not a single donation. Not a moment designed for maximum visibility, but a sustained effort. A third cohort. 24 organisations. $1.9 million. And a model that continues to repeat itself. Now, let's talk about that model, because this is where the story moves beyond funding and into structure. The responsible technology, Youth Power Fund, is not built on a traditional top-down approach. It does not operate on the assumption that decision-makers at the top automatically know what is best for communities on the ground. Instead, it does something fundamentally different. It brings young people into the decision-making process. It gives them a voice in how resources are distributed. It treats them not as recipients of help, but as participants in solutions. That is a significant shift. Because historically, philanthropy has often worked in one direction. Resources flow downward, decisions are made upward, and the people most affected by issues are rarely given meaningful power in shaping the response. This model challenges that. It says that the people living within the problem space often have the most relevant insight into what solutions might actually work. And because of that, they should have a role in deciding where funding goes. That is not just progressive, that is practical. Because solutions are more effective when they're informed by lived experience. And this is exactly what Prince Harry described in other settings as well. The idea that the people most affected by today's challenges need to be in the room where solutions are being designed. Not outside the room, not waiting to be helped, inside the room, contributing, deciding, leading. Now, while all of this is happening, there is another narrative that exists alongside it. And that narrative comes from parts of the British press. A narrative that describes tours like the one in Australia as performative, as strategic, as financially motivated. But here's where that narrative starts to break down. Because while those claims are being made, the work continues. The funding continues. The structure continues. The third cohort exists. The 24 organisations are real. The $1.9 million is real. And the timeline matters. Because this is not a reaction. This is not something created in response to criticism. This is an ongoing, multi-year commitment. Year 1, Year 2, Year 3, consistent, structured, focused, and aligned with the issues being discussed publicly. So when people look at these two perspectives, the critical narrative and the actual work, they are not looking at two separate realities. They are looking at the same reality from different angles. From one angle, the focus is on perception. From the other, the focus is on outcomes. And outcomes are measurable. Funding distributed, organizations supported, work being done. And that is what defines credibility. Now, let's take a step back and really think about what sustained philanthropic commitment actually means. Because it's easy to underestimate it. It's easy to compare it to visible moments. Hospital visits, public appearances, charity events. But those moments, while important, are often temporary. They happen, they generate attention, and then they pass. Sustained commitment is different. It continues when the cameras are gone. It continues when the headlines move on. It continues when the public conversation shifts. And that is exactly what we are seeing here. A fund in its third year. A model that continues to evolve. A structure that prioritizes youth leadership. And resources that are being deployed consistently. That is not accidental. That is intentional. Now, let's connect this back to that moment at Swinburne University one more time. Because it's important to understand that what was said in that room and what is being funded through Archewell are not separate conversations. They are part of the same approach. When Meghan Sussex said the system is not going to change overnight, she was acknowledging reality. When Archewell funds organisations working to change that system, it is addressing that reality. Both things exist together. Both things are necessary. You acknowledge the problem, and you support the people working towards solutions. That is how change happens. Not instantly, not dramatically, but gradually, through sustained effort, through consistent support, through structures that empower people to lead. And that is what makes this moment significant, because it shows alignment between words and action. And alignment is one of the clearest indicators of authenticity. Now, as we bring this to a close, it's important to reflect on what this really represents. Because it's not just about one fund, it's not just about one announcement, it's about a pattern of showing up, a pattern of funding, a pattern of supporting the same areas over time: digital safety, youth mental health, ethical technology. And when you see that pattern repeated over multiple years, it becomes harder to dismiss it as temporary or performative. It becomes something else. It becomes commitment. And that is what stands out here. Not just the number, not just the organisations, but the consistency. Still here, still funding, still showing up. And that, ultimately, is what real impact looks like. Thank you for watching. If you found this meaningful, don't forget to like, subscribe and share. And as always, stay informed, stay thoughtful and stay engaged.